All right, let's pull back the curtain on something that's happening all around us all the time, but most of us never see information systems audits. This is the critical, kind of unseen process that works to keep our digital lives from falling apart.
I mean, think about it. We bank online, we shop, we share our lives online. We're constantly putting a huge amount of trust into these digital systems every single day. And that trust brings up a really big question. How do we actually know that all this technology we rely on is properly secured and, working the way it's supposed to?
Well, the answer to that big question is a process called an IS audit. The best way to think about it is like a super detailed expert inspection for our digital world. Its whole purpose is to examine a company's technology from top to bottom and provide what's called assurance. That's really just a fancy word for confidence. Confidence that everything is secure, it's controlled, and it's doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing.
Now, to really get why we need this kind of audit, we first have to understand the core problem it's built to solve. And that whole problem, it boils down to one simple but really powerful word: risk.
So, risk always starts with a threat. A threat is basically anything out there that has the potential to cause some kind of harm. You've got the obvious stuff, right? Like hackers trying to break in, or malicious software like malware. But a threat can also be something as simple and honestly as common as an employee just making a mistake.
But here's the thing. A threat is only really dangerous if it has an opening it can exploit. And that opening, that's what we call a vulnerability. It's just a weakness in the system. A super weak password, that's a vulnerability. Software that hasn't been updated in forever, huge vulnerability. It's literally the chink in the armor that a threat is looking for.
So this is where it all comes together. Risk is what happens when a threat finds a vulnerability. The formula is actually pretty straightforward, but it's incredibly powerful. You take the threat, multiply it by the vulnerability, and then by the potential impact, the damage. And that gives you your level of risk. An IS audit is all about finding and assessing every part of that equation.
Okay, so if risk is the problem, how in the world do we fight back? Well, the answer is with something called controls. Let's break down how those work.
A control is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It's a safeguard or a countermeasure. It can be a policy, a procedure, or some kind of technical tool that we put in place specifically to lower risk by tackling those threats and vulnerabilities we were just talking about. And these controls aren't just random. They're actually designed to work in layers. First up, you have preventive controls. Think of your password. Its job is to stop a problem before it even begins. But if that fails, then your detective controls kick in. These are things like system logs that are designed to spot that something bad has happened. And finally, you've got corrective controls, like data backups, which are there to fix the damage and get everything back to normal. It's a whole defense in-depth strategy. This brings us to what might be one of the most important ideas to grasp in this whole field. People mix up the roles of security and audit all the time, but they are fundamentally different things. And understanding this difference is absolutely key. This really gets to the heart of it. The security team's job is to build the defenses. They're asking, how do we protect our systems? But then the audit team comes in and asks a completely different question. Are those protections that you built actually working the way you said they would? They are the independent checkers, the verifiers. So who is this person that's double-checking the work of the security team? Well, that would be the information systems auditor. So let's take a closer look at what they actually do.
An IS auditor really wears a bunch of different hats. They're part investigator, digging in to see if controls are really in place and working. They're a risk manager, trying to spot weaknesses before the bad guys do. They're also a compliance officer, making sure the organization is following all the rules and regulations. And at the end of the day, they are messengers, providing that crucial assurance to the higher-ups that the company's digital crown jewels are actually safe. Okay, so we've covered the risk, the controls, the people, but what's the end game here? What is the real-world value of this entire process? It all comes down to what we can call the assurance payoff. This is why it all matters so much. A good audit process directly protects your sensitive data. It proactively finds the cracks in the system before attackers can. It makes sure the company is meeting big industry standards like ISO 27001, which can be absolutely critical for doing business. And maybe most importantly, it builds trust. Trust from customers, from partners, from everybody that the systems you're using are reliable and secure. Now, to do their job right, auditors aren't just making things up as they go. They use established benchmarks called GRC frameworks. GRC stands for governance, risk, and compliance. Governance kind of sets the overall direction. Risk management identifies and handles the threats, and compliance makes sure everyone is playing by the rules. This structure gives them a consistent, repeatable way to evaluate an organization's defenses.
If you're going to remember one thing from all of this, let it be this quote. It just captures the entire relationship perfectly. Security is the team building the castle walls. Audit is the independent engineer who comes in afterward to certify that those walls will actually hold up when they're attacked.
So, the next time you log into your Bang or you open up a social media app, just take a second to think about all these layers of security and audit that are working in the background. Now that you understand how this whole process of verification and assurance works, what questions does that make you want to ask about the systems you trust with your most valuable information every single day?